Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
John, hello.
Jim, you got in ahead of me. Look at you. Look at you taking over the podcast. I'm handing it all off to you now. You're in charge.
No.
Go ahead.
No, please. I have absolutely nothing. It was one time that I came in early. That's all. I will not make a habit of it. I promise.
So it's not a coup.
No. There's no, as far as you know, there's no coup. No. You well? Everything all right?
Everything is hunky and dory. It's great. We
I'm
are
glad to hear.
so far into season 4 that I'm actually planning season 5. Can you believe that? That's how far we're into season
I'm
4.
thrilled to hear it. I really am. I'm always on Spilkus about this time. When we get to chapters 17, 18, 19, I realize, oh, this could be it. I better enjoy this a lot because we may be like Ed Sullivan canceled, in the off season.
Well, and we could be. This could be people going, he said there was going to be, but there wasn't. We'll see. We will always see. Anyway, we are in the heart, in the thick of season 4, episode 18. We're going to listen to chapter 18 of The Miser's Dream. And we're also going to first revisit some interesting ideas from a magician and friend of the show, not a personal friend, but a friend of the show and an acquaintance.
Mm-hmm.
If we saw him at Magi Fest, he would nod at us, hey. But I think he does with everybody. Anyway, it's David Williamson.
He's a one-of-a-kind kind of a magician and human being.
Yeah.
Isn't he? I really enjoy our chats with him.
Yeah, he's one of a kind, like you said. But he didn't start out as David Williamson, not the one we know. Like most magicians starting out, he imitated other performers, as he told us, until he found out who David Williamson was on stage.
Magicians want to be like other magicians. So we see Fred Capps or Slidini and we become Fred Capps or we become Slidini. That's the first stage of learning magic. You try to emulate your heroes, right? But then hopefully over time you find your own voice and you are given permission to actually be yourself. It's really hard. They always say, be yourself. What does that mean? And I get this question a lot, like, how do you choose a character? I go, I don't think you choose a character. I think character chooses you. It's not like you go into a department store and pick one off the shelf like you do a suit or something like that. Be the most appealing version of you that you can be at that moment, right? Don't try to be something you're not. If you're not a natural born comedian, don't try to be funny with props and jokes. It's just going to fit like a bad suit. Likewise, if you're a goofball like I am, trying to be mysterious and evocative, emotional, doesn't always work. One of the things, you kind of asked what I've learned from teaching, and I think it's all about clarity is the word that keeps coming forward that I use a lot. Like clarity of effect. What are we trying to communicate here? But clarity of story. What story are you telling? Let's make it more clear, though. There's too much clutter. There's too many things you're trying to be. You're trying to be funny, you're trying to be interesting, you're trying to be a storyteller, but you're also trying to be a magician and you're trying to explain something like an engineer or something. Let's get clarity of effect, clarity of story, and anything that's unnecessary and doesn't serve us, let's try to get rid of and get to what the essence of what this performance piece is, because it is a performance piece, and let's make it interesting.
You talked to us a little bit about what you think might be the biggest mistake or how about misconception that someone who's just getting into magic, a beginning magician, might have.
Right. I feel more strongly now than ever that it's not what you do, it's how you do it. Right. So these guys think they need the next book, the next trick, the next download, and then they'll make it. And then that's what's going to set them apart. And that's when they're finally going to get off of the plateau they're on or be able to get that gig. And I contend, if you've been in magic a few years already, you already have everything you need. Now you need to unlock all the dogma and shed all the bad habits you've learned and free yourself and give yourself permission to be interesting with what you already do. And let's take what you already do and make that more interesting. And let's make it bigger. Let's scale it. Let's make it more fun. Let's find moments. Has nothing to do with the trick. Most of the tricks have a solid foundation. They come already with a beginning, middle, and end. They come engineered with some secret that's, mechanical or psychological or whatever subtlety that makes the trick work. There's a thing, there's a gimmick, and it's got its own little narrative. Okay, let's take that, kind of take it apart and re-engineer it. Let's make it bigger, more fun. Let's change the story around it. If we have to make the prop bigger, we will. Let's spread it out and let's make it fit you. Let's write something that would actually come out of your mouth. And then let's make it interesting to people.
Let's make it interesting to people. That's a concept, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is the crux of the biscuit. If it's not interesting, you ought to get into some other line of work, bus driver maybe, or I don't know. But yeah, it's so fundamental that it's often overlooked.
Yeah. And you should always just step back and go, is this actually, it's something that I do with the books all the time. It's like, is this, it's interesting to me.
Yeah.
It helps to have other people say, yeah, no, it's interesting to us too.
Yeah, it's, I think there is, so like, let me take Ricky Jay, for example.
All right.
Ricky Jay is so interested in his subject matter that it becomes interesting to me.
Mhm.
Even if I'm not particularly interested, listening to somebody who's super interested in their topic and can make it interesting is cool. But so often that's not the case, and you skip over the part where you make it interesting for the audience, and it just becomes a morass of, yeah. But the word I took from the entire little snippet there was clarity.
Yeah.
Clarity is so important, and again, so easily overlooked. So you get wrapped up in your own little trip, and you forget that the show that's going on inside your head is different from the show that people are watching.
Yeah.
And so having those two ideas, I think, are so good to just keep in the front of your head if you perform for people and take their money in any way, shape, or form. Those are tremendous pieces of advice.
Well, I'm going to throw something at you here, because you do, your Halloween show, and you do how many performances every year?
Usually
A dozen?
15, something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
And you have some standbys, some new stuff. How do you judge clarity when you're putting something new in and you've got an audience, you're going to do it 15 times? How do you judge that they're getting what you're putting out? What's your standard there?
Yeah, and I have tried new things and reimagined the show or changed this goes here and that goes there. I can tell if an audience is with me, and it's a very small venue, so it's not like I can't see them. I can see them all the way to the back. So I can tell if an audience at this point is with me or not with me. I can tell if what I'm doing is furthering their enjoyment of the show, and also am I giving them something that they're interested in. And like I said about Ricky Jay, sometimes I can be interested in something and force them to be interested in it with me, and they'll come along. This particular audience is very, very loyal to me, to the show, to the venue. And so they will come along for the most part, but I can tell if I'm abusing that relationship, and I'm pretty good at not abusing that relationship by this point.
Yeah, that clarity's that's a tough, I feel like I'm going into the West Wing. Boy, crime. Wow.
In the future, if you're wondering,
Yeah.
crime, boy, I don't know, is when I decided to kick your ass.
In the future, if you're wondering, crime, boy, I don't know, is when I decided to kick your ass.
We're both big West Wing fans.
I'm going to put a link in the show notes to the full interview with Dave Williamson. He always has a lot of real smart things to say, in this case about clarity, about the misconceptions that beginning magicians have, and his ideas about re-engineering magic tricks to personalize them so that nobody can steal something you've made personal. They're just
Right.
not They're not going to. Just anyway, I'll put links in the show notes to that. There'll also be a link to, if you just want to, as a listener, you want to just share what Dave Williamson said in that little snippet, there'll be a link there where you can send that out to people if you want. But we love having him on the show and hope to have him back.
Absolutely. I'd love to see him live at some point. So let's work that out.
We got to work that out. Yeah.
I would love to see him live. And speaking of, I would love to. I think that takes us right.
It does. That's maybe it is a coup. Maybe you are taking over. King of the segues. Just got us right to the next segment.
I'm just here to help. I'm just here to help, John. But it is you. It's 4-18, so it's even, which means it's you go first on your "I love you."
Sure. Sometimes you get triggered by something you've seen recently that becomes your "I love it." And you recently, in the past episode, within the last 4 episodes, probably referred us to some Shakespeare films, having seen some Shakespeare at the Guthrie. I was recently at the Guthrie and saw their version of Little Shop of Horrors, and I was reminded that I was very lucky to chat with a couple times Lee Wilkoff, who originated the role of Seymour in the very first musical production. He was the first one to sing Suddenly Seymour.
Lift up your head, wash off your mascara. Here, take my Kleenex, wipe that lipstick away. Show me your face, clean as the morning. I know things were bad, but now they're okay. Suddenly Seymour is standing beside you. You don't need no makeup, don't have to pretend. Suddenly Seymour.
Wow.
And he's a great guy. And the reason I got in touch with him was he had put out a movie that he wrote and directed called No Pay Nudity.
Oh.
And that's no pay, comma, nudity. And Jim, you will appreciate it because it is about an actor of a certain age trying to get work, in this case, equity work in New York, and finding out that nobody wants him. And the one thing he can get is he gets chosen to be in a production of King Lear, which excites him until he finds out he's playing the fool. Which is sort of a metaphor for what's going on with his life. But it's a great little movie about actors. And it stars Gabriel Byrne.
Oh, I like him.
Yeah, Nathan Lane.
Wow.
Because he's a buddy of Lee Wilkoff's and said when the actor they wanted died, he stepped in to do it. And it's about what you have to do at that point in your life to get by as an actor. So the thing is that not only did I know Lee Wilkoff from the original Little Shop of Horrors, because when I was editing my movie Resident Alien, there's a lot of downtime when you're editing a 16 millimeter movie. Downtime, I mean, you're doing stuff that has to be done, but you don't need your brain because you're finding frames and moving things around, doing all that. So I would listen to, I had 2 cassettes I would listen to. That gives you an idea of how long ago this was. One was a tape that had funny, comical, odd versions of songs by like Leonard Nimoy. I've Got a Hammer.
Well, if I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning. I'd hammer in the...
Sebastian Cabot reading the poetry of Bob Dylan.
Say you're looking for someone who will pick you up each time you fall, to gather flowers constantly and to come each time you call, a lover for your life and nothing more. Hey, ain't me, babe. No, it ain't me, babe.
William Shatner doing Lucy in the Sky with diamonds.
Picture yourself on a train in a station with plasticine porters, with looking glass ties. Suddenly, someone is there at the turnstile.
That was one cassette. The other cassette was from the original production of Little Shop of Horrors. And so I listened to Lee do that song and that whole cast do that quite a bit. And when I saw the movie, No Pay Nudity, and wanted to talk to Lee, I recognized the name, but I didn't realize until later that we also know him from a sort of favorite scene in West Wing. And
Who's he in West Wing?
well, he's a lawyer working for the government, and he meets with Josh, and they talk about.
I know the scene.
The case is running out of money.
Which case?
The USV.
You kidding me?
No.
Martin, we spent $13 million the first year, $23 million the second. Where's the money going?
Outside counsel and staff, depositions, expert witnesses, processing, database, research.
Yeah.
We have 31 lawyers on a case against 5 tobacco companies, just one of which has 342. We won't count the 13 subsidiaries that have mounted their own defense. Tobacco has spent $380 million to the government's 36. So when I come here asking for money, it's not because the Justice Department blew its allowance on video games. You understand?
Yeah, let me run it by Leo.
This is a fight worth winning.
You don't have to convince me.
These people perpetrated a fraud against the public.
I'm sorry?
I said they perpetrated a fraud against the public.
So he has that great little scene. He's an actor's actor. So I highly recommend the movie No Pay Nudity. Here's a little snippet from the trailer.
So what news?
So, okay, I talked to Carol, and as always, they love you.
Yeah, they love me. They're not gonna hire me.
No, actually, they're considering you for the Fool.
The Fool?
He's famous. He's an actor.
Oh, neat.
Lester! Why are you eating in here?
Lester, outside. Dog dies this morning. I can't even have a breakfast.
The man lost his best friend today. Let him eat his egg sandwich.
Stop counting other people's blessings, or you will never find any peace in this godforsaken world.
Who are you?
I'm your son.
Perseverance, survival, and beauty. That is the career, my dear darlings.
So you just can get a sense from that it's just a sweet film. You can find it on all your streaming services. That's what I'd love.
Well, now I'm gonna have to check that out, and it sort of dovetails into my I love it.
Well, let's hear it.
So, people come in and out of your life like busboys in a restaurant. I don't know who said that. It wasn't me, but whoever said it, that's exactly correct.
Okay.
And, well, one of the people that I spent a lot of time with in high school and college was my friend Paul, who went on to get his PhD in chemistry, and he now lives in Michigan. And, we sort of have lost touch, as you do. The things that bound us together no longer are parts of our lives. And so, people come, but I always enjoyed him immensely. And I always, I hear from him, I'm going to say once a decade, maybe. And he heard something through the grapevine about a show that I was doing and reached out to me to say, hey, I heard this. Good for you. Congratulations. That's great. How are you? And we had a little exchange. And one of the things he said to me was, are you interested in podcasts? And I said, I didn't tell him about our podcast because
why would you do anything to promote this podcast?
No point in self-promotion. People will find it or not. It's not my job. My jurisdiction ends here. But he said, I listened to this podcast called The Rewatchables, and I think you might get a kick out of it. And so I thought, all right, well, I'll take a look. And I am getting a kick out of it. And it's 2 or 3 guys kind of rehashing movies that they find are good and rewatchable. And it really it's not genre specific. It's not actor specific. It really cuts a wide swath, but they're very witty guys. I get a laugh out loud at least once an episode. And oftentimes I will then revisit the movie that they suggest I rewatch. Most recently, I watched No Way Out after listening to them talk about it. I think I saw it in the movie theater when it first came out and have never rewatched it. but did because they recommended I rewatch it, and I really enjoyed it. So if you are looking for a podcast other than ours, I don't know why you would be, but if you are,
If that happens.
The Rewatchables, courtesy of my friend Paul Vosepka, is a good one. If you're looking for something and you like movies, this is one. It's they have all kinds of sort of inside baseball where these things are concerned, and you're going to get Hollywood tidbits, and they're very bright and smart and funny guys, and you'll end up going, I should rewatch that, and that's the point.
I also listened to that show, and I would warn anyone going in, if you don't understand basketball, a lot of what they talk about, everything somehow relates back to basketball or famous basketball players or
yes.
There is a lot of it goes right over my head. It's like I have no idea who you're talking about.
But you don't really.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
It really doesn't matter. It's like inside baseball is inside baseball, and the people that get the inside baseball references or basketball in this case get them, and those of us who don't, and I'm not a huge basketball guy. I follow baseball, I follow hockey, and I follow football. But I have never followed basketball. It's just not one of my things. And so, some of it goes by me, but it doesn't really matter because it's charming and funny, and they're funny. And I end up watching movies that I go, gosh, I haven't seen that since it was in the theater in 1984. It's probably worth a rewatch. And gosh dang it, No Way Out is a pretty good film. And I'm not going to tell you any more about it, except that Kevin Costner is in it. And
Gene Hackman.
He's one of my guys. Gene Hackman is in it.
Sean Young, I believe.
Sean Young is in it, and she is terrific. Costner uses people over and over in the things that he does. Will Patton, and this may have been their first meeting in No Way Out, but Will Patton is the bad guy in The Postman, which I think Costner got his fingerprints all over, not just as an actor in that film. He shows up in Yellowstone. So once Costner finds somebody that he thinks can hold their own, he's smart enough to say, I'm going to surround myself with talented people, and does. And Will Patton is one of them.
Well, Will Patton jumps off the screen in No Way Out because he is so, I believe the term is unctuous.
Yeah.
He's Gene Hackman's fixer, sort of, and he just drips evil. In a charming way.
Exactly. And in The Postman, he's the bad guy, and in Yellowstone, he's the bad guy, but in a completely different way is the bad guy. So but he's really, I think, a very good actor, and Costner is smart enough to know that. Whatever. My deal for I Love It is the Rewatchables. And I'm thrilled, of course, that you got there ahead of me, John, because if I got to something ahead of you
have many times. Last episodes, the grilling show, cowboy grilling show, whatever that was last time. You were way ahead of me on that. You've been way ahead of me on a lot of things over the years. Don't worry about that.
There was a double pork chop that Cowboy Kent Rollins did the last time I watched him that still has me drooling for it. So, it's good. I'm glad to have been, at least in terms of grilling, one step ahead of you.
As always. No, we're always one step ahead of each other. That's how this relationship has worked. Now, let's get down to, as Dana Gould would say, our filthy business. Last time you did, what'd you do? You did
17, right?
17, right. Yeah. So you're going to
remind us.
Then I should remind you what happened in 17. That is my job before this coup happened. Well, we lost Clifford Thomas. I really regret having killed him. I think I wish I could have brought him back because I liked him. His latest manuscript is missing. Eli points out the hidden title list that Clifford Thomas has that has all the titles he was going to do for possible books. The police chat with other interviewees. Kavanaugh has no alibi. Inspector Wright remembered mediocre Fred. Sherry Lisman says she has no motive for either murder. And that takes us right into chapter 18.
Let's do it.
Chapter 18. For some reason, I was hoping he would bring his monkey. Miles Wright turned his head slowly and looked at me, his eyes becoming narrow slits. Excuse me? I scrambled to explain my odd outburst. "This guy Randall Glendower," I said, gesturing to the new occupant in the interrogation room. "He owns a monkey, a little Javan Mackay monkey, and for some reason I hoped he would bring it in today." Wright continued to stare at me. "To an interrogation?" I shrugged. "A guy can dream." I was saved from any further monkey talk by Randall, who moved suddenly, shifting our attention back to the interview room. He had been waiting patiently, sitting at the table and checking his phone for messages, but he suddenly jumped up and scurried over to the door. Extending his phone at arm's length, he took a quick selfie, standing and smiling in front of the lettering on the door, which read, "Interrogation Room 1." He checked the photo, apparently pleased with the results, and returned to his seat just as Deirdre and Homicide Detective Fred Hutton came back into the room. "Thanks for your patience, Mr. Glendower," Deirdre said. The tension that had been in her voice during the interview with Sherry Lisman had vanished. "No problem," Randall said, sounding far more chipper than a person being interrogated about a murder should sound. If he recognized this, he made no attempt to modify his good cheer. "I'm sure you've heard about the recent passing of Clifford Thomas, and consequently we're revisiting some of the people we spoke to after Tyler James's murder." "Makes sense to me," Randall said with a nod. Deirdre looked up from her notes. "And why would that be?" This question seemed to throw him for a second. "Well, he said, now choosing his words with some care. "I figured Cliff was probably the one who won the bid for London After Midnight, and so his death would pretty clearly be tied to Tyler's in some way, right?" His sentence evolved from a statement to a question while he said it. "Yes, we're proceeding on that assumption," Deirdre said, returning her attention to her notes. "Now, during your last interview, you admitted to having put in a bid on the movie, is that right?" Randall, feeling on firmer footing here, nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, I must have been outbid. I never got the chance to ask Tyler about it," he added. Obviously." Deirdre looked up, and even though I couldn't see it from my position behind the one-way mirror, I suspect she gave him a reassuring smile. "And how did you feel about not winning the bid?" she asked, sounding offhand, although I knew she wasn't in the least. Randall shrugged. "I didn't think I had much of a chance," he said. "There are people out there with far deeper pockets than mine. However, if I'd known it was Cliff who was buying it, I wouldn't have been all that concerned." "And why is that?" "With Cliff, I knew the movie would get out there. People would be able to see it. Some collectors," he continued, lowering his voice, "I don't know, they're all about hoarding, about keeping it and hiding it, and they never let anyone see their stuff." If he wasn't specifically describing Chip Kavanaugh, he certainly could have been. I leaned forward, straining to hear Randall through the small speaker. "And neither you nor Clifford Thomas would have done that?" "I can't speak for Cliff, but I doubt it. And if I'd have bought it, I certainly would have made sure it got out there. It's London After Midnight, after all, right?" He waited for a response that matched his enthusiasm, but it wasn't coming. "It's very rare," Deirdre finally offered. "You bet your ass," Randall said with a big smile. "It's basically the holy grail of lost movies. They found the scene in Frankenstein where the monster drowns the little girl. They put Touch of Evil back together in the right order. But London After Midnight? I've been lusting after this movie since I was 12 years old and saw photos from it in Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine." He paused and sighed deeply, truly emotional on this subject. "I would have killed to see that movie," he finally said. It took several seconds for it to really sink in, but Randall Glendower finally realized what he had just declared. He looked at Deirdre and then at her husband, his eyes searching their faces. His voice trailed off. His demeanor was suitably low-key during the rest of the interview, and on second thought, it was probably best that he had not brought his monkey. For reasons I can't completely comprehend, after I left the police station, I found myself heading toward St. Paul instead of back home. The whole situation with Clifford Thomas felt strangely unresolved, and several minutes later I found myself standing in front of his house on Summit Avenue, looking up at the ghoulish and cartoonish mansion. Crime scene tape on the front door was the only remaining indicator that anything untoward had taken place in or around the residence. The creepy Santa leered down at me from the widow's walk, and the decapitated snowmen on the front lawn were beginning to look a bit droopy in the semi-warm afternoon sun. I knew I couldn't get into the house and didn't know what I would do in there if I could, so instead I retraced our steps from the house down the block and across the street to the Summit Club. Clifford Thomas must have made this same round trip the night before, celebrating the completion of what was likely to be his next bestseller, never realizing that it would also be his last. I stood in front of the exclusive club for several minutes, running my meeting with Clifford Thomas over in my mind. As I did, I absently turned and took in the view of downtown St. Paul below. The Kavanaugh Bank Tower was the centerpiece of the vista, and I thought about Chip Kavanaugh and his offhanded joke about standing over Clifford Thomas's dead body the night before. It was a sick joke, perfectly in keeping with his dark sense of humor, but I couldn't help wonder if it held a deeper truth somewhere within. He admitted that he knew Clifford via their shared membership in the Summit Club. They were both ridiculously rich and both oddball collectors of the rare and the obscure. Had they both been vying for ownership of London After Midnight? No answers were forthcoming, and as I turned my attention away from the scene below, one other building caught my eye. The St. Paul Hotel, nestled snugly across from Rice Park. That wacky Swiss, Quentin Moon, was probably somewhere within, charm oozing from every pore. I'm sure he would have made quick work of the handful of disparate clues I was struggling with, and probably would have cured cancer at the same time. Annoyed at how quickly just the thought of him could overtake my normal faculties, I did the best to shake him from my mental processes as I headed toward the car in the short, unproductive drive home. It had been unreasonably warm all day, resulting in lots of melted snow and running water trickling down Chicago Avenue as I pulled into a parking space that afternoon. As pleasant as the day had become, this sort of thaw in mid-January is always a double-edged sword. Wet streets and sidewalks at 3 p.m. can turn into icy nightmares by evening. The movie theater didn't appear to be open yet, but I noticed Tracy had updated the marquee to another movie mashup, yet one more that didn't derive from a suggestion of mine. Tonight's Parkway double play, Saturday Night and Sunday Morning Fever, looked to be a fun combo, but I still felt many of the options I'd presented had been punchier. As I headed toward the Magic Store, I nearly convinced myself Quentin Moon had thought of it and called it into Tracy, and that there was a vast title mashup conspiracy going on behind my back. I was still swirling in this loop of self-doubt and paranoia as I went to open the door to the magic shop and found it was locked. This didn't surprise me, as Harry and I have always had a very casual relationship with traditional business hours. I unlocked the shop, flipped on the lights, and in a very determined fashion set about to begin the long-delayed and much-needed inventory process. But first, I thought, I should check online to see if I've gotten another response to the ad I placed on Randall's website. This was clearly a delaying tactic, but it had the ring of legitimacy to it, so I went with it. A quick check via the store computer confirmed the only answer so far was the vague response from Classic Seller 58 I'd seen the night before. I surfed around the site looking for further clues, but instead ended up falling down a rabbit hole of reasonable discussion topics, which quickly escalated into flame wars. Then I remembered a ring routine that Quentin had performed at his show the night before, during which he had acknowledged it was based on a Tommy Wonder classic. That led me to YouTube, where I lost who knows how much time delighting in Mr. Wonder's various miracles. I was roused from this video clip coma by the tinkle of the bell over the door and looked up, expecting to see Harry returning from some errand. But it wasn't Harry. You're the guy who found Tyler's body, right? It was Mrs. Tyler James in all her big-haired glory. Standing behind her was her constant companion, still wearing the too small hipster hat on his too big hipster head. He peered around her, scanning the shop, his eyes going a little wide as they adjusted to the dim lighting, which is our hallmark. "We talked to you in the theater the other night," she continued, her tone suggesting it had been a trifle of a conversation which I could have easily forgotten. "About getting into the projection booth?" "I remember," I said slowly, scanning the shop to see what object might become a quick and handy weapon if the need were to arise. Unlike the theater next door, we didn't keep a baseball bat handy for occasions such as this. I noticed a can of fart spray on the gag gift shelf and considered it a likely first choice, as it had proven to be an effective impromptu defense in the past. "I'm afraid I have no access to any part of the movie theater," I continued, but she waved my words away with her highly manicured hand. I know. That Bad News Bears washout next door made it abundantly clear we're not getting into Tyler's booth." She spit the words out, and it was evident she was still harboring a lot of anger from her encounter with Tracy. "She's actually more of a Hoosiers washout," I corrected, and again she waved my words away. "Whatever," she said, clearly already bored with the topic. "Here's the thing," she continued, her tone softening as she stepped toward the counter. "Tyler and me, we weren't always on the best of terms. My therapist said we were codependent, but I think in reality, we were just a pair of drugged-up hotheads who couldn't get along." Her companion tugged at her sleeve. "Look," he said with a big smile, "this place is full of magic stuff." She pushed his arm away. "It's a magic store, you dummy. What'd you think you'd find in here? Tap shoes? Now shut your trap, Gunner. I'm trying to talk here." Gunner lowered his eyes and slunk away, running his fingers across the top of the counter as he moved toward a display of DVDs. A shamed 5-year-old could not have executed a finer performance. "As I was saying," Mrs. James continued, giving him one final look and a definitive roll of the eyes, "Tyler and me did have some good times, and I feel bad about him being dead and all." It struck me this was the first time since it happened that anyone had shown anything resembling grief about Tyler James's murder. "Okay," I began, not sure I had anything to add to this conversation. "I was just wondering," she continued, her voice softening, "if you two ever talked or anything, and if my name came up. Maybe ever," she added. Her brash exterior had faded away quickly, revealing a grieving woman, just this side of crying and doing her best to hold it back. "I'm sorry," I said, shaking my head slowly. "I actually never met Tyler." I was going to continue my explanation, but our conversation was interrupted by a sudden question from across the room. "What's this?" Gunner asked. He was pointing to a fabric strip with the string loop which Harry had left out on the counter after a demonstration. "It's an invisible dove harness," I said absently, trying to keep my attention on the conversation with Mrs. James. "But," he said, scratching the small patch of beard that called his chin home, "but I can see it." He held up the fabric strip and had a sudden thought. "Oh, is it the dove that's invisible?" "Sure, it's the dove that's invisible," I agreed, turning back to Mrs. James. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Gunner scanning the room slowly, looking for any indication of the imperceptible bird. "As I was saying," I continued, "Tyler and I had actually never met. I'd seen him at work through the window, but that was all." Mrs. James sighed deeply, leaning on the counter as if in need of a little support. "I see," she said quietly. "So you two never had a chance to shoot the breeze about me or any of his online sales opportunities?" The last was casually tossed out as a throwaway thought, but there was a glimmer in her watery eyes which gave her away. "No," I said sharply, recognizing I was being conned, and not too expertly at that. "We never spoke." She took out a handkerchief from a voluminous handbag and dabbed at her eyes dramatically, but I think we both understood the show was essentially over. That's too bad, she said, trying to deliver a sniffle and coming up short. I think you two would have really hit it off. I'm sure we would have, I said, putting as much ice in my voice as I could. Now, if there's nothing else, I need to get back to my inventory work. This was true, however, start would have been a more accurate verb. She gave me one more long look, then dropped the grieving widow act with the speed of a seasoned Las Vegas impressionist. Come on, Gunner, she said, stuffing her unused handkerchief back into her purse and pulling out several sticks of gum. We've got other fish to fry. The sticks of gum were unwrapped and deposited into her mouth with well-practiced speed. She walked to the door and pulled it open, clearing her throat meaningfully. The sound produced a conditioned response from Gunner, who dropped the magic wand he had been examining and made a beeline toward the door. Careful, he hissed, pushing her through the door and swinging it shut quickly as he gave the shop one last look. You don't want to let the dove out. There was a quick slam of the door, and they were gone. I'd like to say the next 2 hours were productive, inventory-wise, but that would be far from the truth. I'm not even sure I can honestly say I made a dent in the process. But somehow, 5 o'clock came around, and I closed up the shop in anticipation of a planned dinner with Megan. I was steeling myself for the inevitable recitation of her experience with Quentin Moon the night before, vowing to keep my jealousy in check. I threw on my coat, shut off the lights, and was locking the door and marveling at how warm it still was, even with the sun just about to dip below the horizon. "Hey, stranger," said a familiar voice. "You coming or going?" I looked up and broke into a wide smile. Harry was walking toward me, holding a small bag of what I assumed were groceries. "I wasn't sure if our paths would cross today," he said, shifting the bag from one hand to the other. "I've been in and out," I said. "As have I," he said, "but I've been dying to talk to you. I didn't get to hear about your gig last night. How did it go?" I realized a lot had happened in the last 24 hours, and so first I brought him up to speed on the untimely death of his favorite mystery author. After getting over the initial shock, he too immediately commented on how Clifford Thomas would have preferred his murder have a locked room element to it, which in this instance was sadly lacking. "The police think the two murders are connected?" "They're operating under that assumption," I said. "Hopefully that doesn't steer them down the wrong path. Remember what Di Vernon so famously said," Harry added, pointing a finger at me for emphasis. The problem was the great Di Vernon had said so many things Harry quoted, it was often difficult to land on which bon mot was the one he currently had in mind. Was it confusion is not magic?" He shook his head. "No, of course not," he said, instantly annoyed. "Truer words were never spoken, but that's not what I'm referring to." I took another shot. "Don't make unimportant things important?" He gave me a pained look. "Of course not." I racked my brain. If I could climax as many times as a Derek Dingle routine, I'd be a happy man?" "Oh, for goodness sake, you're not even trying," he said, with irritation. "It was, the problem with magicians is they stop thinking too soon." I thought Al Baker said that. This made him pause for a second, and then he waved it away. "Regardless of who said it," he snapped, "my point is, sometimes the police stop at the first right answer without looking a little further for a second, better right answer." I certainly couldn't argue with that, and even if I could, years of this sort of back and forth with Harry had taught me there was little point in trying. "Be that as it may," he continued, his mood brightening, "how was your gig last night?" I gave him a brief rundown of my successful evening, purposely leaving out any mention of the shameful costume. I instead focused on how well some of the old routines had gone over, thanks to the new insight gained by taking them apart and putting them back together. "Excellent," he said with a warm laugh. "There's nothing like putting some new life in the old act. It sounds like it was a good night for magicians all around last evening." "How do you mean?" Oh, I heard through the grapevine Quentin Mullen put on a rather dazzling display at a corporate event. Knocked the socks off, they say. Did he? I said, flatly, but Harry took no notice of my tone. He did indeed. Apparently the meeting planner said, in effect, that Quentin Mullen walks on water and glows in the dark. So sorry I missed the show, he added as he put his key in the lock and unlocked the door I had just secured. Are you headed out? He asked as he swung the door open. I didn't have time to answer, though, because at that moment there was a sudden tremendous icy crash around my shoulders, and seconds later we were both lying flat on the sidewalk. I thought I heard some shouts and struggled to open my eyes. Then there was another cold, wet crash against my head, and I blacked out.
Okay, once again, poor Eli is knocked unconscious. This time Harry as well. There's a lot of winter in this book, and Jim, I'm sure you've been in situations. I don't know if you ever had a house where you had to get the snow rake and pull the snow off the roof, or if you've been walking along, minding your own business somewhere, and a huge chunk of snow just fell off a roof right in front of you. If you're not really a Minnesotan unless that's happened, and that's what has happened here. They've been hit on the head with snow. Not a whole lot to say about that, but I will say we recently got an email from a listener who loves Randall Glendower and loved the. He said his basement lair reminded him of Ready Player One, and he hopes that Randall survives the book and turns up later. I won't say any more about that, except I'm glad that people like Randall.
I really do get a kick out of reading the emails when they come in. Ken from New Jersey, I'm looking at you right now. I enjoyed your email immensely, and I can't believe, being a New Jersey guy, that you're not also a Springsteen guy, but I will take you up on the offer of a Springsteen pilgrimage tour if I ever get out your way.
Okay, you heard it now. It's been recorded and it will remain in this episode.
Forever and ever.
Forever and ever and ever. All right, it's been jam-packed episode. In the show notes, we'll have stuff on David Williamson, his full interview, how to get in touch with him for lessons, his little snippet in this show you can pass around. Also be links to our I Love It's, which would be the podcast, The Rewatchables, which both Jim and I listen to, and Lee Wilkoff's great little movie, No Pay Nudity, which is such a great title.
It really is.
Because it really explains the actor's life. It really does right there. Next time, we're going to be chatting with magician Matt Dunn. Of course, we're going to talk about magic with Matt, but also he's unique in that he's used his understanding of magic to create his own Halloween theme park, Screamtown.
Huge here in Minnesota.
I think we've done, 2 interviews where we went on location, one with Larry Kalo at Ego Magic and one with Matt, and it was a delight. It was a delight. Anyway, next time, that's Matt Dunn, and then Chapter 19, getting toward the end, Chapter 19 of The Miser's Dream. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Albertsbridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at EliMarksMysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.